Good day, everyone. Welcome to participate this event organized by Urban Working Group of Future Earth Taipei and supported by Academia Sinica of Taiwan. And this year, Urban Working Group continue to organize the popular science talk. And it's including 15 on-site and 5 online activities. The purpose is to use a simple language to expand sustainability science and connect it with the international network. And I'm Tzu-Ping Lin, the conventor of the event. And today, I'm happy to welcome Professor Dr. Andreas Matzarakis. And we are 20 years friends. So today, I'm very happy to introduce Andreas. And Andreas, would you please talk a little bit for yourself? And also, you work in German weather service and deal with a lot of heat issues in DWD. So please introduce yourself and a little bit for your work there.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm happy to be again here. And I would like to talk about my person. My origin, I'm meteorologist. I studied meteorology at the University of Munich. And then I have run my PhD at the University in Thessaloniki in Greece, which is my origin. And then I continued to work at the University in Freiburg. And 2015, I decided to change from, let me say, academia to administration, where I spent about 9 years at the German Meteorological Service, dealing and serving there in human biometeorology and also leading the Research Center Human Biometeorology there. And then in the beginning of this year, in the spring, I changed my affiliation and moved to the University of Freiburg, which is my former university and so on. And at the moment, I'm serving also in the University Council of the Democritus University in Greece. And during my job at the DWD, at the German Meteorological Service, I was responsible about the connection between the weather and the health. And there are some specific issues which have a very strong relevance, a very, let me say, big interest in terms not only of weather, but also of climate and climate change. And we have several parts there. And these parts we can divide, let me say, in big topics. And one of these big topics is heat, because we know that heat and heat waves can change mortality and morbidity. And we know that this is not only a short-term topic, but it's also a long-term topic. But in the short term, we can take actions. And we know that during heat, many times we can have also UV exposure. That means this is the biological effect on the human body. That means mostly on the skin of the humans. And we know also that people like to travel a lot, and that means leaving one area, going to another area, we have different effects because we are exposed in radiation. The third part that we have is the weather change, because when you have short-term changes in the weather, the human body needs some time to react. And this is not anymore thermoregulation or biological reaction of the human body, but it's because of the control system that we have, which is the nervous system. And finally, we have many parts in, let me say, in the atmosphere, or many pollen, which we call bioaerosols, but also gases and particles. We can quantify this in air pollution, but pollen is not air pollution. It's, let me say, natural pollution and so on. And here it's important to know what the condition is, because we combine here thermoregulation, but also the skin, the eyes also, but also the breathing. That means we are close related to medicine. This is one part, and we have here the possibility, and when we describe this by the term my weather and my health, the possibility to protect people with a weather forecast. And the second thing that we have, and this is my job that I'm doing now at the university, is to go more to the micro scale, to go there where the people live, in order to see what is the best situation to develop new residential areas or no urban areas. And as we can see here in the one picture is that in reality, in a micro scale or in an urban area, we have two different kind, we call it in climatology, obstacles. And the one is the buildings and the one is the trees. Of course, the trees is much better than the buildings in terms of a microclimate, but they have here the possibility developing models in order to have information and also to provide information and strategies for the future in the era of climate change in the micro scale, and especially in the cities where the people are living.
Yes. So I think the audience sees the simulation for the building in the urban area. And based on our collaboration many long years, so I think Andreas is not only a meteorologist, but also very good at urban planning and building design. And as I know, not only in Taiwan, because we always experience a very hot condition during the summer, but I've been to Freiburg for several times, and during summer I feel very hot on that day. So it seems that heat issue is not only for hot and tropical area. The people in Europe also suffering this kind of problem. And Andreas, could you please a little bit talk about what's the people were suffering when they are exposed to the heat conditions? What's the mechanism when we go outdoors and we are exposed on the sun, and what happens for the people?
Yeah, concerning heat, anything that we deal with the environment is that we have something like a stable condition, which is, let me say, this 37 centigrade temperature of the human body. And the human body can respond on that, can have reactions on that. We can deal much better with cold, because we have the possibility of wearing more clothing and so on, but with heat, we have something like an overload. Yeah. And this overload shows us that the people cannot deal so easy. We can adapt a little, but not so much. And in order to do that, we try to develop methodologies which are based on the thermophysiology, on the reaction mechanisms of the human body. And we have three specific ways how to really quantify that. The one is the thermophysiological one, which we take from thermophysiology, say there are no impulses, no reactions about the warm and cold receptors, and we see that the human body can change his preference to the environment. The second one is something energetic. We can see the human body like an engine which produces heat and releases this heat, or is an exchange with the environment, and so on. We can take here as control factors the core temperature and the skin temperature. And the third one is the psychological one, where we can, as humans, ask the people, and they can justify that and say it's too hot for me, or it's too cold. And based on that, and when we put all the things together, we can develop, or we have developed methodologies and approaches like the thermal indices, and this thermal indices can provide us the possibility in order to quantify that. Yeah. And we see here a wonderful example, which is the possibility that we have in order to quantify heat, taking something like classes, combining all these three factors like thermophysiology, energetic factors, and psychological. And what we see here is the PET scale, which is something like the real field temperature, which is developed from Europe, or has been adjusted for Europe. And I think the first adjustment for tropical regions has been 2008, that we made together and published this based on a paper that we have run for the Sun Moon Lake in Taiwan.
Yes, Andreas reminds me about the Sun Moon Lake paper, because we use the local questionnaire to identify the thermal comfort range for the people from hot and tropical area like Taiwan. And it seems that we need not only for this kind of table, we need some plan or some schedule for the people to deal with that. And as I know, in Germany, they have a very famous, we call it heat health action plan. Would you talk a little bit for that?
In order to provide let me say, tools and actions how to deal with heat now and in the future. And it was not started in Germany, but that was before from the WHO, the World Health Organization. They provide some guidance about heat health action plans in order to improve the public health for extreme situations like heat and heat waves. And when we look behind in the heat health action plans, we see that they include several factors, or we call them success factors, which is not only, let me say, the scale that we saw before, but there are more factors which has to do with the sectors, but also with the preparation and protection and so on. And first of all, that we have, the factor number one is the coordination and collaboration. That means who is responsible for that? Who is responsible for the heat actions that have to be taken and so on? The second one is that we need a system which provides any warnings, any alerts. And this has to be, of course, differentiated in terms of the region where we are. And the third one is the communication. That means it has to be communication. We need an information plan, but we need also the information about indoor, because we know that most of the people spend their time not outdoors, but indoors. And then we have specific groups, population groups who are affected much more, which is mostly the people who provide, need care, but also elderly people and so on. And then we have to staff one of the most important sector in terms of heat and how to manage heat, which is the health and social sector. And then we need the long-term urban planning. Then we coming to the situation where we talk about how we have to change cities in order to keep the quality of life that we have at the moment. And finally, of course, everything that we are doing has to be monitored and, of course, evaluated.
So it seems that at first to make sure who is responsible for that, and some alert warning system, and also for long term, like urban planning. So
we have here two specific situations. The one is the recent one when I have extreme heat, which is the acute situation, which means I have to run some actions. And we have here a wonderful example, which is also included in the heat health action plans. And as you mentioned, also the responsibility, depending on the country where you are, because Germany is a federal state, and the responsibility is to the states, not to the federal government. In other areas like France, they have a central system. You have also something like a central system that means responsible have to be the government.
So it depends on the organization.
Exactly. It depends. It depends on the organization, and we have here a specific action that has started 2023 by the Ministry of Health. This is the federal ministry, where the minister realized that it's a very emergent situation, and they try to bring all the responsible authorities and federal states together. And they started and say, in order to have a good action, the first that we can do, because we know heat can be deadly, we need a starting point. And the starting point is to have a warning system with heat warnings. And this is the first one, to bring the people that they register for that, to have all this information for that, and then to have recommendations and actions which is really very fast to be promoted and also to be applied. And the one is to drink water. The second one is to keep the indoor cool, to stay in shade, not exposed in the sun, to avoid activities, and to have light food. If you have heavy food, you don't feel good the next hours or the next days. And also, what is more important, to take care about you and others. This is for the acute situation. And all the other things that we have is really to prepare the specific economic sectors, like the health sector or the social sector, but also long-term urban planning.
So from my experience in summer, because we go for a trip in Taiwan many times, so Andreas always thought that I'm always hide in the shade of the trees or arcade. So it seems different climates, different contexts of urban, it will contribute different heat action plan. So as you are a frequently traveler in Taiwan, any comments for Taiwan if we want to have this kind of HHAP plan in Taiwan? Any suggestion for that?
Yeah, I have a specific suggestion, because based on the experience that you have the possibility to generate heat health warnings. And these heat health warnings is a combination of several factors. And the first one that we have is you have the weather prediction for the next day. You take all the information, temperature, humidity, wind, and radiation, and you run a specific thermal index. That means in a quantification of the heat stress. And we know that also that the first heat wave is the more intense. That means you have something like an adaptation. And then you combine the conditions outdoor with the conditions indoor with a model where you can calculate the conditions during the night, the temperature and humidity in the buildings. And then you have something like a warning proposal. This can be checked by a meteorologist. This is the way that Germany is running. And then you have a specific warning for countries, or let me say smaller regions and so on. And this information has to be distributed, not only to the public, but also to the nursing home. And of course, the distribution of the public has to go by the ministries and the health authorities. And of course, you have to consider in the warnings the elderly people, but also the people who live in the cities, because I think in Taiwan, the population who is living in the cities is about 70%, and so on. And of course, this information has to be distributed. That means it has to be communicated. And the other point is the quantification, let me say, by architecture, urban design, landscape architecture. And we have here several approaches. And we can include here, or let me say, all this new words and new definitions that we have, talking about green, blue, or smart cities, and so on. And then he can combine here, let me say, and provide information about the cities, how the cities can be modified in the recent situation, but also how the cities can be in the future.
Yeah. So it seems that we are not only thinking about the outdoor environment, but also indoor, because some people, they are exposed in a very hot condition. But if they go inside the work for their homework, or they have some specific disease, maybe they were suffering more. So would you please talk about for indoor and outdoor, and how to define the regulation to deal with some thermal adaptation for that? Any suggestion for that?
There are several possibilities, and as you mentioned, the heat health action plan is not only outdoor, but it's also indoor, because one of the topics that we had was reduce heat indoor, and here is required or is needed to have information and to have recommendations, maybe also regulations. In Germany, there is a specific regulation that if you have an indoor temperature about 26, you have to be informed and take care about you. For 30 centigrade, it has to be taken actions. That means the employer has to drink water, or if it's outdoor working, it has to be also shade. But also if the indoor temperature is 35, and we say the people who are working there can stop working. But this is a regulation, but this has to be seen in the context of the outdoor, of the duration of the heat, and so on. It has to be realized it's in the beginning of the summer, or it's in the late summer. In the late summer, the regulations can be, of course, a little different. And of course, we have the heat health action plan. So we see here the table with the original from the Euroheat project. And one of these points is, of course, a reduction of heat exposure. And this is exactly what we need. But more important is the communication. That means it has to be communicated. And when we have a warning or we have recommendations for how the people can change their heat exposure, we need specific ways of communication. We have communication parts. I mentioned this before. We have, of course, the ministries and the health authorities, but this is not the only one. We need also the doctors, the pharmacies. Pharmacists is very important, but also the care and the nursing, but also the emergency services, because emergency services are by their own exposed, but they have to care also about the others.
Yeah.
And then we have specific population groups, like the elderly group, but much more important, of course, is neighborhood help, but also we have the possibility of NGOs and so on. That means we have the communication, but, and which is much more important, we can have the best system, but it has to be communicated, and we can have the best action in order to protect the people from heat, also other extreme weather situations. But these actions have to be implemented. They have to be followed and they have to be used.
Yeah. Yes. It reminds me that in Taiwan, when we have typhoon or heavy rain or earthquake, and our mobile phone will receive a message to say, to identify the location that we are stand or we are sit, expose what kind of risk. So it seems that the system in Germany, they also have a very warning system by the mobile phone, and they got some message to alarm the people to care about that. And I think communication and implementation is quite important. But when you do these things, do you face some problem that people will not care about that, or they didn't understand the information inside? Because as I know, Andreas go to the media and to translate this kind of information frequently. And would you talk a little bit about this kind of communication more?
Yeah. Communication has to be easy understandable. It has to be appropriate. Too much communication can be in a negative, maybe, direction if you have too many warnings. The one thing that you mentioned is about the mobile phone, that you get a message. You get this, I think, for typhoon. This can be also when you have heat. This can be, in some cases, I think it's very good opportunity, but because of regulations, we have to be careful about that. This is the one point, but the other point is the education. That means we have to educate. The one point is the behavior, and the other point is, of course, the education from the people. That means we need, let me say, normal situation of that we are humans and we have to think appropriate the things. When it's hot, and Andreas is doing this also, and you do this also. Andreas, when it's hot, he's tried to stay home, and Tzu-Ping is going under the tree in order to have shade.
So it seems that different people, even they are exposed in the same condition, they feel different way. And of course, sometimes they are working outdoor and sometimes they are working indoor. So in Taiwan, we have a strong debate about if we have a heat wave or we have a temperature higher than 38 or something, should we have a day off? Because in Taiwan, some weeks ago, we have a typhoon, so we have 3 to 4 days day off. That means we don't work, but we can get the payment from the employees. So what do you think about the day off? What's the philosophy inside? Should we do that, or we should arrange that for adaptation, so for the prevent for the heat wave?
I think this is something that is valid for general extreme situation. It can be typhoon, it can be also heat. I think depending on the level of the heat, also the duration of the heat, maybe it's easier to adapt the working times. Or many people will learn this, I think, from the pandemic, that we can work at home and so on. This is maybe one of the advantages that we had. And about that, to take a day off or to have a day off, I think this is not for everyone possible. Because in reality, all these actions and the adaptation that can be done, I mean technical adaptations like just like taking a day off, we have to realize that it's only possible there where it's possible. This is the one point. Depends on the culture, depends on the government, and so on. That means it's a little critical. For my perception, I will say, if you have in June or in May here extreme situation, of course you can close the schools, but you can not stop the industry. So that means it, as I mentioned before, it's possible there where it's possible.
Yeah, and finally, I got some message from Andreas give me long times before. Because when we talk about the thermal issue, that in the future we are suffering the climate change, Andreas told me a very interesting idea. He says the climate is dancing, but climate change is dancing and you're drunk. So would you please talk more about, for the thermal issue under the climate change, what we will be suffering and what we need to prepare for that?
Concerning climate change, we have several extremes or situations which we will have to deal much more. Of course, one here in your region, sure it's the typhoon, but we have also to deal, let me say, with heat, but also with dry situation, with extreme precipitation, but in other regions, maybe not here, but it's also, of course, forest fires and so on. The problem with the extremes, or the situation with the extremes, is that they are changing, and they are changing in terms of the intensity, in terms of frequency, but also in terms of the duration. And it's exactly what we know about that. For heat, which is my topic, we know that more than 70% of the worldwide population in the future will be exposed to heat. That means we need not only long-term actions, but we need also the short-term. That means how the people have to deal. And I think the best will be to deal with that situations and with that extremes that we have, in order to bring this very early in the school, very early in education, but also to discuss about that, because climate change and also the extreme situations like typhoon is not during the summer, but it's a topic that has to be discussed overall the year.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so today we are very happy to welcome Andreas to visit Taiwan again and have a very good presentation today. I hope in the future you can come to Taiwan again to talk more about the risk, I think not only the thermal, but right now we are suffering the typhoon, earthquakes, like a multiple risk. So based on our knowledge, we should adapt to the future better. Thank you very much, Andreas.
Thank you very much. Yeah.